My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm 23 years old and have been married for 2 years. I work in an office and my husband Nathan is 29. We have a 1-year-old son named Leo. Nathan often tells me I should quit my job at my dad's company. He doesn't like my parents, especially because my dad dropped out of high school and runs a small, rough-looking company that makes screws and small parts. Nathan feels embarrassed about being connected to such a company. But I admire my dad for working so hard, being brave in the face of failure, and caring about his employees. I have no plans to leave my dad's company. Nathan doesn't like that I respect my dad more than him. One morning during breakfast, Nathan brought it up again. He said, "Alyssa, you should think about getting a job at a bigger company. You went to a prestigious university, you're beautiful, and I want to brag about you at work, but I can't because of where you work. Besides, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider becoming a housewife?" We had this conversation many times. I always tell him the same thing: I won't quit my dad's company. Usually, Nathan gets upset and says things like, "You're the only one who doesn't listen to me," or "If you keep this up, it'll be harder for us to stay together." After that, he leaves, but the problem doesn't stop there. He often does things to upset me, and then says, "See, now you listen to me." I've thought about divorce, but I can't bring myself to do it. Our parents get along so well and love Leo so much. It would break my heart to upset them. My dad and father-in-law are good friends. They go golfing and fishing together. My mom and mother-in-law also get along well, often going to art exhibits together. Both sets of parents adore Leo and have created a loving environment for him that I don't want to take away. But my love for Nathan has faded. I don't even like sleeping in the same bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in Leo's room with a lock on the door. I added the lock because Nathan would come into the room while I was sleeping with Leo and start complaining about my dad's company. Leo would get scared and cry because of Nathan's loud voice in the dark. Nathan has stopped coming in at night, but I still lock the door to feel safe. This morning, Nathan harassed me again about quitting my dad's company. As usual, Nathan was being petty. Even though dinner was ready, he didn't come home. Instead, he went to a bar with his colleagues and sent me a photo of himself smiling with one of the female staff members. This kind of photo doesn't bother me or make me feel insecure. Right after I saw the photo in my messaging app, Nathan sent me another message. "See, this is how I blow off steam because you won't listen to me. If you don't want me to do this anymore, quit your father's company now." Honestly, I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of our parents and our son, Leo, I replied. I said, "I just wanted you to come straight home and have dinner with us." He texted back, "Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now." I found myself regretting marrying him, thinking that even though he's smart, his behavior and mindset are so childish. Then one day, Nathan excitedly told me, I might be getting promoted soon. I replied, "Wow, that's great. Did that recent deal go through?" "It's not finalized yet, but it's as good as done," he said. "I bet the boss will be thrilled. Even the director, who used to act so high and mighty, will have to bow down to me now, haha." That day, Nathan didn't tell me to quit my dad's company and went off to work. As for me, I left home with Leo and dropped him off at my parents' house before heading to my office. When I got to work, my coworker Jake rushed up to me. "Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually angry today. Did something happen? Everyone's worried about him." Hearing this, I knocked on the door of the room labeled Invention Room, where my father was. Inside, I saw a young man in his 20s sitting on the sofa with a tear-streaked face. My father was sitting across from him, looking angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Sorry, Alyssa, I can't spare time to chat with you right now," he said. I replied, "Everyone's worried about you. What's going on?" Apologizing, he invited me to sit in on the conversation. As I sat down next to my father and looked at the young man, he stood up to introduce himself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Scott. I'm sorry for causing the boss any trouble." I asked him, "May I know what happened?" Scott, who works for an electrical machinery manufacturer, started to explain. He mentioned that he'd been promoted to assistant leader for a new machinery project. It was interesting to hear more. The designated leader of Scott's team doesn't attend meetings or go to the field, acting mostly as a figurehead. The team members seem to prefer this, saying it makes things easier. So Scott ended up doing most of the leader's work. Some parts from my father's company were chosen for their project, and Scott, without scheduling a meeting, went to my father's company and demanded, "I need to speak to the CEO." Scott's messy hair and multiple rings didn't make a good impression on my father's secretaries, Jackson and Randy. They told him, "Please adjust your attitude and appearance before coming back." Confused about what was wrong with how he looked or acted, Scott went back to his company and asked his boss, who angrily replied, "Don't let them push you around." be assertive and tell them we're using their parts. Wanting to fulfill his team's wishes and use the components from my father's company, Scott returned and politely asked Jackson and Randy, "Please, let me know what I'm doing wrong." My father overheard this conversation and decided to talk with Scott in the meeting room. He explained, "We don't judge people by their appearances. I believe Jackson and Randy were just trying to teach you about proper workplace behavior." Jackson and Randy agreed and gave Scott some tips on professional etiquette, explaining that how he presents himself can influence how other companies view his entire organization. When asked, "Which company do you think you can have a decent conversation with? One where people are well-dressed and respectful, or one that isn't?" Scott replied, "The former. Let me apologize and start again." After that, Scott scheduled an appointment and returned with a neat appearance, standing straight, tidy hair, and no accessories. As we talked with Scott, we noticed his sincerity and dedication to his work. He wasn't just interested in obtaining components but was also eager to share ideas and knowledge. This led to a successful collaboration between our companies. Young members from Scott's company began visiting my father's company proactively to seek advice. However, just as a prototype was nearly complete after almost 6 months of work, problems arose. The team leader took all the presentation materials that had been prepared. Additionally, the assistant leader was removed from his position and replaced by a young female employee favored by the leader. Despite strong opposition from the team and collaborators, they were threatened into silence with statements like, "Anyone who objects will be made uncomfortable in the company by spreading various rumors." Hearing this made my father furious. Jackson, who had been listening nearby, commented, "Those rumors are just lies. You shouldn't be scared, right?" The assistant leader was reportedly removed because he reported a violation of working hours to the HR department. According to Scott, after severe warnings, the assistant leader was dismissed. Scott came to my father's company this time out of frustration. He was upset that, despite all his hard work, the person in charge was being changed without justification, and he wanted to discuss the situation. "You should quit that company and come work for us, right, boss?" Jackson suggested. My father, pretending to be a famous character from an old Western movie, responded with a humorous impersonation that made everyone except Scott burst into laughter. Scott, despite all the hard work he had done, said, "You all seem to be having fun. I've always admired that and really wanted to work with you all." With teary eyes, he bowed his head in front of my father, who accepted his plea with joy. Something was bothering me after hearing Scott's story, so I decided to ask him a question. I asked, "What's the name of your company?" It turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company where my husband worked. Hesitantly, I asked further, "Can I ask the name of your team leader?" As I feared, Scott replied, "His name is Nathan Johnson." My father and I were shocked. After a brief silence, Randy spoke up. "Ah, I knew that name sounded familiar. It's Alyssa's husband." I told Scott, "I'm sorry, but that's my husband." Scott then explained, "He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company, so I'm actually grateful to him." Jackson, looking concerned, cautiously asked, "I hate to ask, but since Alyssa is here, does the favored female employee have any connection to your husband?" Scott looked at me, struggling to answer. I reassured him, saying, "Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore," which surprised my father. After apologizing to my flustered father, I finally told him everything, about all the things my husband had said and done to me every day, and why I hadn't spoken up before. My father understood and said, "No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me. I've lived a life I'm not ashamed of, so I don't care what anyone says about me. But it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing bad things about her parents. Don't worry though, I'll keep my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome." His words made me feel like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Then Jackson asked Scott, "What about the relationship between your husband and this favored female employee?" Scott replied, "There are no solid facts, just rumors, but it's the talk of the company. Several employees have seen the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms together. A few have even seen them going out for lunch." At this point, Randy began making a phone call. "Hey, I've got a case I need you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?" After hanging up the phone, he added, "I'm going to have a friend of mine at the private detective agency look into this." At the same time, Jackson started making a phone call too. "Hello, I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce due to infidelity." "Oh, you can? Great, can you come to the office right now?" "Thanks." As Jackson and Randy made progress on their calls, my dad commented, "Your greatest strength has to be your ability to take action. with a laugh as he watched the scene unfold. Scott also offered to keep an eye on the situation for the time being. Everyone then returned to their workplaces to continue working. My father, sensing the worry among the employees, reassured them, "I'm sorry for the concern this has caused, but it looks like we can laugh about it now. My apologies for the trouble, and thank you as always." Hearing this, smiles returned to the employees' faces, and the lively atmosphere of the workplace was restored. My father then came over to me and asked, "May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?" I replied, "I just want you to tell them to continue visiting and showing affection for Leo as they always have." By early afternoon, a private detective and a lawyer arrived at the office to discuss our future course of action. The contents of the meeting were then shared with everyone present. It was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would relay the details of the discussion after work. When I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation from my own perspective, apologizing for not revealing my husband's true nature sooner. I felt guilty, as if I had trampled on my parents' feelings, who believed we were living happily. However, my mother wasn't upset at all. In fact, she seemed thrilled, saying, "Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson." She had noticed the disdainful look my husband gave my father's company the first time he saw it and had suspected he wasn't a good man. "I wish you had told me sooner," she said. The next day, it seemed that Jackson received a phone call from Scott on his smartphone. Scott had submitted his resignation, informing the company that he intended to spend his remaining time wrapping up miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation, but all the members of the project team reportedly visited the HR department to state their concerns. All the team members said, "We've all broken the company's work rules just like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us too." When the HR department saw everyone holding resignation letters, they were thrown into chaos. By the end of the regular workday, my husband had already left home, so a meeting was held in the large conference room with the company president, department heads, and the remaining project members, including Scott. In the meeting, it was revealed that my husband, who was supposed to be the team leader, hadn't attended any meetings, hadn't been present at work, and hadn't contributed to the project at all. Instead, when he found out that the team had completed the presentation and necessary documents, he took all the credit for their work. He even removed Scott from his position as deputy leader and replaced him with a female employee he favored. The company president expressed deep regret if these accusations were true. At this point, Scott suggested that no drastic action should be taken until all the evidence was gathered. He explained that since I, the wife of the team leader, was related to one of the company's clients, a private detective was also investigating the situation. Scott proposed that nothing should be said to my husband until they had solid evidence. The company agreed to wait until the evidence was collected before questioning my husband and deciding on any disciplinary action. They also asked the team members to hold off on their resignations. Unaware of these serious events, my husband, who usually comes home on time, returned home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He started ranting about how useless everyone else was and bragged about working overtime to make the project a success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I gave him a few compliments, even though I didn't really mean them. He seemed to enjoy imagining himself as the department head, admired and envied by others. My husband kept grinning. The next day at work, Scott's plan was put into action. All the team members began to continuously praise my husband, saying things like, "Mr. Department Head, not quite yet. It seems the CEO is very hopeful about this project." My husband was thrilled and constantly excited as everyone kept praising him, asking, "How can we become competent men like you, Mr. Johnson?" His guard started to drop, just as we planned. Within just 5 days, we obtained a video of my husband's affair with a female employee through hidden cameras set up in the document room and conference room. The detective agency and Scott collected a ton of evidence of his infidelity. The only thing left was to prove that my husband hadn't created the project documents. This was easy because Scott had saved the documents on a USB drive. If the company compared the content of the documents by asking Scott and my husband, it would be clear who did the work. Scott and the other team members submitted all the evidence to the company. Meanwhile, my husband came home in high spirits, completely unaware of what was happening. He started boasting, "I'm definitely going to be made department head." The CEO was talking to the current head for a long time, and then the head looked at me. He probably said he'd rather have Mr. Johnson as head than any incompetent like you. He continued, "Once I become department head, the gap between your father's company and mine will widen even more. you should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head." I replied loudly, pretending to be angry, "Your parents would be mad if they knew you were mocking my parents. You know they're good friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I absolutely won't quit." My husband got angry and said, "Never invite your parents to our family events again. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women flocking around me as soon as I become department head." When I asked, "Are you sure about this?" he replied, "What do you mean? Don't contact me again." So I responded, "All right, I'll leave," and had him sign the divorce papers I had prepared. The next morning, after seeing my husband go to work silently, I called my father to help me move. As my father, some workers, and I were loading our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived, saying, "We came to help." My in-laws apologized to me and I apologized to them. They said, "Thank you for letting us be Leo's grandparents. Our idiot son is disowned. We're counting on you from now on, Alyssa." They both bowed their heads. I held their hands and said, "Thank you," while also bowing my head. My father said, "Let's hurry up and move so we can relax at home." My father-in-law agreed, "Let's do that," and continued helping with the move. The move went smoothly, and in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was getting a divorce from my husband. My in-laws kept apologizing, but my father said, "Let's continue to get along," and playfully patted my father-in-law's knee. My mother added, "Mary, let's keep doing embroidery together. There's an art exhibition next week, let's go," and she playfully patted my mother-in-law's knee. My father then invited them to stay the night and have a drink. My father-in-law thanked him and agreed to come over later. It was nice seeing my parents and in-laws getting along so well. Not wanting to interrupt, I decided to go to Leo's room and go to sleep. The next day, my husband was called into a meeting with the CEO, department head, and other executives. Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with were also there. During the meeting, the CEO asked my husband if he intended to claim the project as his own and steal the completed documents without contributing. With Scott and the team members present, my husband couldn't make excuses. The CEO, frustrated with my husband's silence, demanded loudly, "What do you have to say?" My husband quickly admitted to his actions. Then he was asked why he had removed Scott from the deputy leader position and replaced him with a female employee. My husband said he thought she was more capable than Scott. The department head responded, "Are you saying that someone who only serves tea and makes copies is better than Scott?" My husband lowered his head and stayed silent. The CEO then showed still images from the video footage taken in the conference and document rooms. Both my husband and the female employee, Alice, turned pale. The CEO then asked Alice, "Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?" Alice responded without hesitation, saying, "Mr. Johnson promised that if we were together, he'd make it easier for me to earn my salary, but I have a boyfriend, so I wasn't serious about him. I just saw it as part of the job." My husband was furious and yelled, "You had a boyfriend, you ruined my life, you should be mad at me." Alice shot back and a heated argument broke out. The CEO, fed up with the situation, declared, "The fact-checking is over. I'll announce the disciplinary action later. For now, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you're both suspended. Go home." Everyone quickly left the room. As a result, my husband was reassigned to a menial job sorting documents in the basement, a position often seen as pointless in the company. Alice, after her boyfriend learned about the affair, faced difficulties at work and decided to resign as well. A lawyer prepared a settlement agreement where my husband had to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million as compensation. They both ended up taking out loans to cover these payments. Additionally, my husband agreed to pay an extra $5,000 per month for child support for Leo. A few months later, my husband, who had been cut off by his parents, was working 2 jobs, one at a convenience store during the day and another as a security guard at a parking lot at night. He was living alone in a rundown apartment. Someone who saw him commented that he looked as if he were in his 60s because of how much he had aged.